The gospel lesson from this morning comes from the book of John, chapter 11, verses 1 through 7, and continuing through verses 17 to 27. Now a certain man was ill, Lazarus of Bethany, the village of Mary and her sister Martha. Mary was the one who anointed the Lord with perfume and wiped his feet with her hair. Her brother Lazarus was ill. So the sisters sent a message to Jesus. Lord, he whom you love is ill. But when Jesus heard it, he said, this illness does not lead to death. Rather, it is for God's glory, so that the Son of God may be glorified through it. Accordingly, though Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus, after having heard that Lazarus was ill, he stayed 2 days longer in the place where he was. Then, after this, he said to his disciples, let us go to Judea again. And continuing in verse 17, when Jesus arrived, he found that Lazarus had already been in the tomb 4 days. Now Bethany was near Jerusalem, some 2 miles away, and many of the Jews had come to Martha and Mary to console them about their brother. When Martha heard that Jesus was coming, she went and met him, while Mary stayed at home. Martha said to Jesus, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. But even now I know that God will give you whatever you ask of him. Jesus said to her, your brother will rise again. Martha said to him, I know that he will rise again in the resurrection on the last day. Jesus said to her, I am the resurrection and the life. Those who believe in me, even though they die, will live. And everyone who lives and believes in me will never die. Do you believe this? She said to him, yes, Lord, I believe that you are the Messiah, the Son of God, the one coming into the world. The gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Christ.
It is such a privilege to be invited to be with you here today. Thank you sincerely for having me come from Austin, Texas, to be here in your midst, to hear about your ministry, to worship together, to reflect on discernment together, and just to learn from each other. I teach in a seminary in Austin Presbyterian Seminary, and when I go back into the classroom this week, we just started our new semester, watch out, because undoubtedly stories of what I learn here from pastors who are in pulpits and in the politics of Presbyterian life day in and day out teach me, and then I bring that back into the classroom. So I like to think of myself on my better days as bringing stuff that happens in class and sharing it with presbyteries and churches, but just as much so bringing what I learned from you back in the classroom so that I can be a better former of ministers. So thank you for that gift that you give to me and give to the church and give to future ministers who are under all of our care. Please join with me in prayer. And now, O Lord, may the words of my mouth and the meditation of each heart gathered together in your presence this morning be acceptable in your sight, for you are indeed our strength and our Redeemer. Amen. Most of the time when we think about memories, we think about things that happened in the past. Sometimes these memories are beautiful, beautiful stories that we cherish. Stories that are shared by multiple people in our families, and everyone tells them just a little bit different way. And you sit around and argue about the details because you love the story so much, you kind of have fun arguing about the details. I know all of us have stories like that in our families, in our churches, in our communities, in our lives. Some of my stories include the story of when the ducks shrank the first time it rained, the story of my brother who had just watched Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory when he was 4 years old, fearing for a couple years thereafter that he would turn into a blueberry. And then there was the story of when my husband and I were missionaries in the Philippines, and someone told us that there had been a missionary who went underwater in the sea and didn't ever return. Not even a year later, we were told. That wasn't one of the happier ones, but it is one of the stories told and retold. And then there was the story of me with my first car, a Nissan Sentra, gold Nissan Sentra, and I came to get in my car one day and there was this pyramid of stuffing that had been taken out from the back seat. Apparently a couple of mice had moved into my car that I was driving every day for the winter. Now, these are all really good stories that I could talk about at some length, and they're good even if you don't happen to know them. But even if I told them to you and you laughed, they would be even better for me and my family because we lived them. We lived them. They're my stories that sometimes I share. Stories about my history, stories about my relationships, stories about events in my life that have formed me and shaped me and those who are closest to me. We tell stories like this over and over again in order to continuously remind ourselves, remember ourselves. We tell them in order to be whole. There are, of course, also bad memories. I've been surprised to see that there is maybe some kind of silver lining. I'm reticent to say that, but I think there may be a silver lining even in some of the vulgar comments our now president said several months ago about women. I've been following stories about this in the New York Times, and apparently it has precipitated many women remembering horrible things that had happened to them long ago that they kind of buried down deep inside, situations in which they were harassed, oppressed, treated poorly. And the silver lining in President Trump's transparency has apparently cracked a dam that has held them back from spilling out these memories, which they are now, for better and worse, remembering out loud to each other, remembering in walks, right? In marches, remembering to reporters, remembering out loud on televised panels to their spouses of 30 years, to all of us. This remembering, though it is scary, dangerous, and uncomfortable, I believe might very well restore us to wholeness as a culture, as women, as men, as those in relationship to one another, as communities comprised of men and women who live, who worship in partnership, reflecting together the image of God. Question for us is, are we ready as pastors, as ministers, to help people remember even the hard things so that they might be healed, so that they might, by God, be made whole? St. Augustine is famous for things that he said about memory. He marvels in his book of Confessions, not our book of Confessions, his Confessions, in his Confessions. He marvels at what he thinks is more awesome, he says, quote, than the heights of mountains, the huge waves of the sea, the broad flow of the rivers, the extent of the ocean, and the courses of the stars. The power of memory, he says, is an inner chamber, large and boundless, and yet somehow we don't stop to wonder at it, he says, to admire it, to be astonished by it, he says. In a nutshell, he marvels, what memory tells us is that, he says, the mind is too narrow to contain itself. The mind is too narrow to contain itself. Well, that's kind of a hard to grasp, amazing statement on Augustine's part. Built within us, he thinks, is an awareness of the big story of wholeness. Built within us is an awareness of our participation in that which is eternal. It is by way of memory that we can escape the confines of this present moment, remembering the past and also remembering the future. Through our remembering and our premembering, as I've decided to call it in this sermon, remembering forward, we're able to be present for each other in each particular moment without being constrained by the limits of time itself. The theologian, some of you might remember from seminary, Jürgen Moltmann, associates awareness of eternity that makes memory possible with Christian hope. So there's a correlation between memory and hope. Hope, he suggests, is remembering forward to what God has promised. It is our hope, he says, that enables us to be wholly present in the here and now, because premembering snatches us in the midst of time from the transient, he says, and annihilating works of time. And it does this, Moltmann says, in a way that doesn't remove us from the present moment, but allows us to participate more fully in it. Amazing, isn't it? The memories we have of where we come from and where we are going free us to be fully present right now, because they remind us that this time in this world and in these mortal bodies participates in something greater than themselves, and are therefore not only made of dust, but also of crucial importance. This moment, see, came from somewhere, and it's also going somewhere. It matters right now, this second, these bodies, this meeting, this day. Martha, I think, knows this. We often give Mary all the credit for understanding the big picture, for choosing what is better. We send Martha back into that kitchen to get another platter of food. But Martha gets the eternity thing too. She's the one actually who coordinates the meals, the servants, the household, so everyone can gather at her place to remember, to premember, and to contemplate eternity with Jesus. You know the type that does that sort of thing. You might even be one of those types. And if we play a trick and begin at the end of the John 11 story that Rebecca just read first, we see perfectly clearly that Martha is outstanding at the work of Christian hope, at premembering what has been promised. When Jesus asks her, following the death of Lazarus, if she believes, she comes back with nothing short of an apostolic confession. Yes, Lord, she says, I believe that you are the Messiah, the Son of God, the one who is coming into the world. Even in this moment of her supreme grief, even at this point where she is expressing profound disappointment that Jesus did not show up in time to heal her brother, Martha refuses to forget that this present moment participates in an eternal reality. And so she refuses to cease hoping, even in these anguishing circumstances. I know my brother Lazarus will rise again in the resurrection on the last day, Martha assures Jesus, who seems a bit concerned, I'd say, that his delay has weakened Martha's faith. A humorous dynamic in an otherwise very serious story is that Jesus seems to be asking Martha if she believes he can raise Lazarus today, not at some time in the future. I say this because we all know, of course, that Jesus is about to call Lazarus out of the tomb, but Martha, acknowledging the fact that Jesus' timeline is different than she had hoped, resorts to remembering only ahead. On the last day, she affirms, my brother Lazarus will rise. All will be well, not today maybe, but at some point in the future. I still believe, even though you didn't come when I called you. This is what we say with Martha, isn't it? When God doesn't seem to come through today. This is what we do as people of hope. For I know the plans I have for you, God tells Jeremiah, plans for your welfare and not for your harm, plans to give you hope and a future. Well, we don't know exactly when those plans will kick into place, we remind each other. Clearly later than we wished. So we'll keep on keeping on. We'll just keep on praying that prayer we've been praying for 2,000 years already, asking for God's kingdom to come to earth as it is in heaven, pledging ourselves to keep seeking God's will. With Martha, we've had to shift to a long view of how God works in order to remain faithful in order to continue believing. On the last day, I believe Lazarus will rise, Martha confesses. And this seems faithful enough given the circumstances. I mean, how much more can we expect Martha to say, given that Lazarus has already been in the tomb for 4 days and Jesus has dragged his heels in getting there? But what is a bit humorous is that Jesus seems impatient with Martha's answer. I think he wants Martha to believe he will heal Lazarus right now. What makes this a little funny is that Martha just a few days ago did actively believe that Jesus could heal her brother in the here and now. Because she has hope in what God will do in the future, she believed that God would do something for her brother right here in the present. She believed God would help Lazarus by way of her friend and Lord Jesus himself. She believes, as she says, that Jesus is the Messiah. And she starts off in this story believing that this means something, not only for her future, but also in the here and now. This is precisely why she calls for Jesus to come, expecting him to come and to lay his healing hands on her brother and his friend. Day after day, I picture her waiting by the window, her hope for this world fading as Lazarus grows sicker and dies. Jesus doesn't come through. And so Martha nimbly shifts to a more futuristically oriented hope. When Jesus tells her that her brother will rise, she interprets this to be about resurrection that will occur at the end of time. But Jesus seems frustrated by this. Come on, Jesus, I want to say, what can you expect? You're the one who didn't show up. We believed, but you didn't come when we thought you would. So we shifted to the long view of how you would operate in the world. And now you want us to believe you are acting in the world in this very moment? You want us to think of the promise of resurrection as being applicable to the here and now? Frankly, Jesus, it would have been a whole lot easier to believe this if you had just come when we called you, as we thought you promised you would. I think Jesus doesn't want Martha to lose her conviction that what she pre-remembers about the future also has bearing on the present moment and our present circumstances. Perhaps he was concerned that she had given up on hope when she ran out to meet him when he was still, the text tells us, 2 miles away from the house, greeting him breathlessly with the honest, grief-filled pronouncement, "Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died." Martha, the one who hopes, the one who believes, the one who remembers and premembers, doesn't mince words when it comes to communicating what she feels and what she expects. This woman, along with her many gifts of leadership, knows how to pray, as Calvin instructed, out of an urgent sense of want and desperate need. It is a prayer of lament that she offers to Jesus. Lament is the form hope takes, I think, when what has been promised has not yet been delivered. Far from giving up on hope, Martha's cry to Jesus is the strongest possible affirmation of it. If she had given up, she wouldn't have run out to meet him. She would have waited in the kitchen till he arrived, maybe humming an old hymn, "Trust and obey, for there's no other way." There's an interesting medieval painting or tradition of painting Saint Martha with dragons. I'm no expert on medieval art, but I've seen lots of pictures in museums of saints with dragons. Most of the saints are men, and they're dressed in armor, and they're holding blood-dripping weapons with dead dragon carcasses lying at their feet, heads of dragons dripping, victorious. The pictures of Martha with the dragon are different. Martha is never wearing armor. And usually she has bare feet, or she's wearing these little dainty sandals that are completely inappropriate for dragon slaying. She's clothed in these flowing kind of white garments, and her long hair is curly and loose, blowing in the wind, which I think must symbolize Ruach, the Spirit of God. There's no weapon, there's no blood, there's only the maternal scolding figure, like this. That's how she looks. And the dragon is on the ground like this. like a puppy that's being chastised. Yeah. If you had been here, my brother would not have died. Right? Now, I wouldn't dare go so far as to argue that Jesus is the dragon. Just on record as saying that in the paintings. But what I think the dragon might be is Martha refusing to give what is happening in the present moment over to the confines of time. There's something more that we participate in, she knows, because eternity surrounds us. And we're able to access it because we remember and we premember and thereby are able to lay claim to the present moment and circumstances as a moment that really matters, profoundly matters in the whole scheme of things. And of course, what we remember and premember as Christian people of hope has everything to do with Jesus. What God has promised us in and through him is life abundant, is healing from sin, is victory over death, is forgiveness and resurrection. What Jesus himself has promised is that he will never leave us nor forsake us. What he promises is that he will come again and take us to himself. What he promises is that even though he has delayed, it is not too late to raise Lazarus from the dead in this life, in this world, and on this day. This is quite a thing for us to hope for, given that it hasn't happened yet. For the healing of this land, this world, our lives, for the whole and complete end to the terrorism, racism, sexism, classism, heterosexism, jealousy, narcissism, and self-deprecation that are merged at the root of our brokenness. For lions and lambs to lie down together and everyone to join hands in unity around the table and all to be fed and each to be fed by the hand of another. Do we believe this? If we do, we had better remember to stand in the wind of the Spirit and get out our scoldy finger because there are going to be a lot of dragons to ward off. They are the voices that tell us we have to settle for a hope that is only about the future because Lazarus is already dead and it is too late. They are the principalities and powers that try to convince us that what we believe will cash out in the world to come, but not in this one. These are the dragons that encourage us to forget, cooperate, smile, and survive, rather than to remember, insist, lament, and thrive. Like the serpent in the Garden of Eden who was so convincing to Eve, these dragons lure us into a space where we can forget God's promises, lower our expectations, and minimize disappointment. These sin-filled spaces are much safer for us than dealing with the expanse of memory, superabundant grace, and unconditional love that characterize eternity. Sin is relatively manageable. It is hope that'll take us out. Yes, Lord, says Martha. Yes, Lord, I believe that you are the Messiah, the Son of God, the one coming into the world. Can we say this on this day with Martha, while honestly facing the disappointments and griefs of this time, of this nation, of this world? If we can ward off the dragons and make this claim, we may witness resurrection on this very day.